Hello and welcome to the Premier Injuries podcast, where we discuss all things to do with injuries in the Premier League. We're going to give insights into players with knowledge on return times and cutting through rumour or misinformation. This is at the same time every Thursday through the season, even if it is the international break, or sometimes we do go live as well. So if you do have any inquiries, comment below, tweet any of us, and we will do our best. Also, before the analysis on the big stories, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. But Raj, welcome back as always. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yourself?
Not too bad. Wish for a better Arsenal performance, but I'm feeling good. And Ben, as always, a pleasure. Are you keeping well?
Obviously, because I look well. I'm fresh from a brand new cut. I've had the nose done, the ears done, the hair done, the shave. Obviously, hot to trot.
I mean, it's you're looking 10 out of 10, although usually you look like 9.5. So it's hard to improve on perfection, but you've managed it somehow. Let's get into the discussion. Raj has just kind of cringed there at how disgusting that was.
We must have a different scale.
It must be like, across the pond and all that. LA standard might be different, I don't know. But let's get into the discussion points. We got to talk about, first and foremost, we've talked about it before, we got to bring it up again. Tuchel, Reece James, the discussion points there. I don't know who wants to open out on this one. Raj, do you want to bring it up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of just what we touched on. I just confirming what we all touched on before, Ben and I, that you can't really trust what a manager is saying. Take it with a huge grain of salt. We both saw a mechanism. We both thought it was high ankle sprain, which comes with, on average, I think it's a 55-day, but 4 to 6 weeks is the general. And so originally you had Tuchel saying, "Oh, he's just in a lot of pain. He might be able to play." And then when Ayling calls him up, he's like, "Well, he's still in the pool." And that's 2 weeks later. So, and then even the original release was at least a week, right? And people took that as a week. So the language is very, very important to pay attention to in these things.
And this is something that, obviously we're all talking about injuries all the time, and so it kind of comes back to us, but also it comes back to the medical stuff, and this is something we're going to come on to a little bit later with injury data and things like that. But does it give unfair pressure, Ben, to injury staff as well? If Tuchel comes out, says he could be back within a week, and then it's not happened, does that suddenly give unfair pressure to them?
It gives unfair pressure to me. Because the second Tuchel come out and said this about, he's in a little bit of a pain and we're looking at a week. That's it. That's gospel. He's potentially returning at the weekend for Chelsea. And then you just get those streams of comments from social media. You don't know what you're talking about. You're lying. You're full of it. And you can imagine everything. So you go through and it's a block. Ultimately, what we said was we talked about mechanism of injury and we looked at the data. And we talked about a potential return to play for some players around 25 to 28 days. So, given the fact that's international break, we're going to be bang on that schedule with a possibility of an average of up to maybe sort of 4 to 6 weeks. There's absolutely no guarantees that Reece James will be back for game week 8 as it currently stands. He just doesn't know. So, the clubs ultimately care about, people like us in the community who are, of course they don't, but our audience, the people that listen and follow should really listen to us and follow our advice and guidance. And like Roy says, just take it. Clubs will tell you what they think you want to hear or what they want you to know. And I wouldn't read too much into that, to be honest. There's very few managers out there who will put their hand on the heart and tell you the situation exactly how it sits at that particular point in time.
And even when they've done that in the past, we talked about Bielsa quite a few times on here, he got hounded for telling the absolute truth, and then he's gone the other way. So there's kind of no winning in this situation, and that's probably why managers do it anyway. But I think one of the interesting things kind of from this season is going to be Granit Xhaka. His injury journey is going to be documented through the Amazon Prime documentary. Ben, are you looking forward to this one purely from the fact that it might display a lot of the things that people might not understand when somebody's ruled out with an injury, or kind of, how timelines can change, or injuries can, be perceived one way and then something else happens?
I mean, absolutely. It'll give us an insight of what goes on behind the scenes, almost that peek behind the curtain. We'll be looking at task-based activities and progressing over a particular timeline. We cannot even categorically rule out surgery at this stage, although, we're hopeful that might be the case, and Xhaka could just come through, without a surgical intervention. I think for the interests of TV, not the player, but I think the surgery route would be a great one to follow as well. But, fingers crossed for the player and for Arsenal, that isn't the case, although other supporters may have a different view on that. But it also gives for me, an understanding and maybe an appreciation. And by the way, look, let's take the salary things, and players are well paid, and this is their job, and this, that, and the other. Look, it's hard to get motivated all day, every day, to maybe rehab for 5, 6, 7 hours in that room by yourself or with a physio when the rest of the team are out there enjoying their football, particularly if things are, Arteta maybe is beginning to turn things around and Arsenal are getting results on the pitch. There's a great atmosphere, in that you feel a little bit disconnect from the group, and I think this will help Xhaka in a way to keep him motivated, to keep him focused, and may even enable him to try and maybe progress through that, rehabilitation program a little bit quicker than that sort of 3-month timeline as suggested by Arteta.
Raj, are you kind of excited as well to look at maybe the behind the scenes of what Arsenal have in terms of their medical facilities? Because I remember with the Man City documentary, you got to see that they use cryo things to be able to keep Vincent Kompany maybe a little bit fitter than he was in previous seasons. Is that one of the things that you're going to be keeping an eagle-eyed lookout for?
Yeah, no, it's always fun trying to see what these top clubs are using, and then also peeling back that layer, like Ben said, for what the players go through. Me being in it every day, I see it. And so you kind of tend to see just how disconnected people can become from the club, from the team, or from just that motivational level. And so I'll be really interested for the casual individual to really understand that process and really what it takes to get back to on-pitch fitness. And I think in Xhaka's case, it'll be a really interesting example because he is one of the more fitter players. And so kind of seeing how we can progress through. And like Ben said, having those cameras around might be that extra kind of motivational tool for him. I mean, as a physio, when I'm treating players or whatever it is, you try to come up with any trick you can to keep that person motivated, right? Or whatever it is, right? Show them a clip of their backup and how well they're playing. I don't do that one too often, but things of that nature. You want to keep the person engaged as much as you can and keep them motivated. And so, very, very excited to see that from the perspective that you mentioned in terms of the actual process and what they have access to. And then also just for fans to see that entire process as well.
And I guess this kind of removes a little bit the smoke and mirrors, although they will kind of display only the things that they really want us to see. So it's 50-50, isn't it, at the end of the day? We will see some extra things, but maybe not everything. We do keep the topic on Arsenal, though, and one of the things that happened this weekend was Gabriel. He's got a trip to the dentist rather than the doctors. What happened there, Ben?
Another collision, another lost tooth. I think it's the second time this has happened to Gabriel. Maybe in the back end of last season that it also happened. And then we've seen those sort of this solitary lone figure in an empty stadium with the floodlights on, and Gabriel's sort of like scouring the turf looking for his teeth. I think it's probably about time he's invested in some kind of mouth shield or some kind of protection. But it's going to save him some money eventually, because he's already had his new gnashers sorted out. Very impressive, very white. I think that was done on a Sunday by about lunchtime, so that wouldn't have come cheap. And it was just a little amusing sight, but. Yeah, vanity's it's all done and dusted, and he's got a great smile back on his face now.
Do footballers have a different type of tooth fairy come visit them? Because obviously, us regular Joes probably can't afford their lifestyle. So do they kind of get, I don't know, a platinum coated ring or something instead of $1 under their under their pillow when it happens?
Only if you've got the teeth, Jason.
Yeah, that's true. If he has no more teeth, then that will happen. I mean, what are the kind of risks with that situation there, Raj, though? I mean, we're obviously joking about with the tooth fairy and everything, but is there any kind of long-term implications that could affect a player's career if they keep losing their teeth like this?
I mean, makes it harder to eat, which can affect your fitness. but not really. I mean, honestly, not really. If you're losing your teeth, my wife's a dentist. I showed her the work. She was quite impressed. And so she gave the sign off on the work that he had done to put that in. So that's some inside info right there.
Oh, wow.
I mean, unless it's like a severe trauma, right, to the face, something like that, you don't really face any long-term consequences. Like Ben said, he should probably invest into a mouth guard. I think it happened on that collision with the keeper as well. So he tends to put himself into some of those situations, especially when he's up in the air. And so maybe that risk-reward ratio, the calculation for him needs to change a little bit. But thankfully, I mean, there was nothing worse came of it.
The thing for me, Ben, is that, Gabriel, twice it's happened to him. Does this happen often to footballers, though?
Do you know what? I'm trying to cast my mind back, and there are instances in the past, and I was actually going to raise a similar point to Raj, given Gabriel's age and 23. And you talked about this risk reward and maybe sticking his head in places where it maybe shouldn't be or shouldn't belong. Do you think that comes maybe with just a little bit of naivety, given the fact that he's only 23, and as he grows to mature, will that be maybe a better understanding of the game and a better understanding of players' movements, and when, to take that chance and when maybe just to hold back?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
Do you know what? And then as I was asking that sort of question, making that point, I then cast my mind back to David Luiz. And for me, he was forever sticking his head in where it just didn't belong. I even think the incident with Raul Jimenez was, it was an accidental collision and he didn't mean that. But for me, it was just borderline stupidity. and he was an accident waiting to happen, because he was just so... the word I'm looking for is just... there was no sense of...
reckless?
Yes, exactly that. A recklessness about his approach to head. The ball's there. Let's win it. Doesn't matter who's there. Doesn't matter if there's another head there. Let's steam through it. And for me, it's almost like, you can excuse one or two. But when it's becoming more and it's on that continual line, and that culmination was the Jimenez one. And I think if it hadn't, the severity of the injury hadn't been as such, I think he might have come in for a lot more flack.
I mean, with that description there, Ben, of recklessness going into these, quite often you hear the commentators go, this player or this person is particularly good because they give it their all on the pitch and they fight for every ball, and quite often that kind of never say die attitude is lauded. But is there kind of a limit where it's never say die, but then you also realise that this is a dangerous situation and I'm unlikely to win a ball. Or, quite often a manager might encourage a player to play to that limit and maybe above, because that's sporting excellence.
For me, there needs to be a level of accountability, where we're now dealing in particularly this day and age, with long-term concussions and repeated head trauma, and the impact that will have further down a career and potentially long-term. I think this needs to be addressed. There's one thing about, you won't go on the pitch, you would hope, to necessarily go out and hurt a player. But, if you're putting yourself in those positions and, let's look at the opposite, the end of the body. If it's a tackle and, you could go into a reckless tackle. Yeah, I didn't mean to hurt him, but actually I did, and I snapped his leg. What's the difference here? It's that. Is it that split second? Is there a need to do that? The game has changed. It's evolved. Players need protection, and for me, I think this is something which will be picked up more in the game going forward. I think there will be a move maybe more towards protecting certainly strikers and from centre backs maybe coming through and challenging from behind and impacting head injuries. I really do.
Well, this is something we spoke about on an earlier podcast, that we don't think that the new rules in the Premier League are conducive to actually protecting players enough as well. But let's move it to Luke Ayling. What's the most up-to-date information on that, Ben?
So now we looked. It was a difficult one to ascertain exactly what happened. Limped off at St James's Park. We now know that the likelihood is that he's going to require surgery on his knee for what is deemed as a clean out. So of all of the potential problems that Luke Ayling may have had, the clean out is certainly on the good end of the spectrum in terms of a recovery and a quick return to play.
Raj, what is a clean out then for the average person?
Yeah, typically clean out means if you have there's some tissue in your knee joint that's irritated, and they'll go in and they'll clear it out. Whether if it's a meniscus, they need to kind of shave down, or if there's something, a quote, loose body that has broken off into the knee joint that's bothering. The loose body being a piece of cartilage within the knee joint. They'll go in. They'll do it arthroscopically, meaning through a small little tube, small little camera. So it's not very invasive. And they'll go out, they'll remove what's irritating him, and then get back on with rehab.
And it's a relatively low risk kind of procedure then?
Yeah, relatively. I mean, sometimes with surgery, you never know what you're going to get 100% until you go in there and see it. But typically, it's on the lower end of the spectrum.
And so how long after the international break before we see him again?
Again, that depends on what they fully find. Have they released any updates on that?
Yeah, nothing, Raj, as far as I'm aware. I'm along the same lines. You probably just maybe tidying up with that meniscus, that cartilage a little bit. And I was hopeful if it was straightforward, maybe 4 to 6 weeks is realistic.
Well, that's a good insight into a fairly well-owned asset in terms of FPL as well, though I think a lot of people will be going off him because Leeds haven't been very good defensively and also because of the injury. But we're going to wrap up the discussions today with a data dive, and this is, what we can do here exclusively with Premier Injuries because we've been collecting data for so long and can kind of give these great comparisons year on year for data in terms of injury. So, Ben, what is the comparison that you've done from the first 7 game weeks of this season compared to last season?
Yeah, so often get asked a lot of questions with regards to the number of injuries or player absence that we've had season on season. And this season seems to have had more than last season. Now, we're compiling the data as we speak. We tend to liaise with clubs during each international break. So that data is, it's being collated as we stand. But what we do, we correlate cumulative figures for player absence at the time of kickoff for every game week. And we've done a like-for-like comparison over the first 6 game weeks of last season compared to, the 7 and 7 this season. And what we've actually seen a reduction of around about 13% in terms of the number of absences. So, and that's reflective probably of the, that condensed pre-season program that we've seen at the beginning of 2020, 2021, whereas players, yes, some have been involved in those European Championships in the summer, but the majority or a large proportion of those players have had a good, solid pre-season under the belt, and that's reflected in the numbers and that downturn in the number of absences.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Jason. Does that include COVID-related absences too in the data?
Yeah, so this is, we run 2 sets of data. One is total player absence, and that's regardless, which would include suspension, personal reasons, so on and so forth. But this particular aspect of it is anything which is injury or illness related. So something which would count against the data. So yeah, all of your COVID and so on and so forth. So it is like for like in that regard.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up with the data, and by the way, great question, Raj, because it's good to kind of clear that up. But the numbers that you get here, now obviously you've said that there's actually a reduction year on year here, but quite often I get annoyed with the rhetoric that comes out of, I don't know, the other, let's call them journalistic organisations. I don't want to name any names, don't want to shame anybody, but quite often the discussion point is X club has so many injuries, what are the backroom staff doing? And this filters through to fans as well. So Ben, obviously, as we said, there's a reduction here, but even if there was an increase, can you explain how it's often nothing to do with background staff? It's not a medical team problem. Sometimes it's unluckiness. Sometimes it's just how the dice have been rolled really that season.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of how I'd like to use first 2 seasons in the Premier League, coming up from the Championship, Wolverhampton Wanderers. Record was impeccable. They posted the best numbers in terms of number of days lost, in terms of the number of injuries that they had, that we've ever recorded, and even that's going back to 2001, back in the days with Physio Room. Very little change within the squad in terms of personnel. And so their 3rd season, we then seen absences. We've seen a number of ACL problems, Johnny, and it increased by something like 60 or 70%. And, a lot of that was just down to purely being luck. First and foremost, when we spoke to Phil Haywood at the start of the season as part of that program, we discussed about his time at the club, and when they dropped down into League One, as it were, and they talked about a time where they had, I think it was something like 11 players in the treatment room, 5 or 6 of those players serious long-term problems, 4 ACL injuries, and because they didn't have a massive budget, they had dropped down the leagues. They had to think about how they were going to manage it and availability, just because they didn't have the resource to be able to, go out and buy players to replace. And so they invested heavily within the medical department. And the following season, I think their availability levels were up to 95%. But even he said, look, there's football is a contact sport. It's just the look of the dice. Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it doesn't, and you just sort of hope once they cross that white line, you hope that players are going to stay fit and healthy and not pick up an injury. But sometimes you just can't legislate for it, and medical teams are, like you said, are unfairly judged. But they have very little to do unless unless you see a physio on the training pitch, managing load, working with the players all day, every day, looking at their nutrition and making those decisions on return to play, getting involved with the player, speaking with the manager. Look, it's a multifaceted working environment with potentially sort of 20, 25 people, stakeholders involved in that process, to sort of single out a single department or a single person within that department, it's massively unfair.
Raj, is this, do you echo everything that Ben has said there? Is this something that really annoys you when you're making your videos, or you get sent questions yourself analysing certain injuries, that people unfairly go in on certain backroom staff?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. And I think to Ben's point, to sum it up, there's so many unknown variables that we don't know looking out. There's a multifaceted approach, like he said. And a lot of these things we simply don't know. And a lot of it can come down to that bad luck. Another example is Liverpool last year. You had, a VVD contact injury. Joe Gomez gets his foot cut in the turf, tears his patella. Thiago has a nerve issue with his leg, which extends his recovery timeline, right? Matip contact injury. And then I have people saying, well, it's the Liverpool medical staff. When in fact, if you look at their previous injury record, especially with the amount of games they were playing and how often, especially their side backs weren't being rotated out by Klopp, it was pretty dang good. So you have to look at everything in full context. And even then, we don't have near the full picture. We don't have what their training schedule looks like. What are they doing for strength and conditioning, their nutrition? What's their sleep pattern like? Are they traveling more, et cetera, et cetera? So, to take something that's full of 25 variables and narrow it down to one at a complete absence of information, it's a non-starter in my opinion.
Yeah, and like I said here, this is the best place to kind of get that information in terms of analysis. No rumour, no misinformation, and contextualise a lot of the information as well. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. That is us done for this week. Like I said, we will be back next week, so make sure to tune in then as well. But before we go, do comment, like the video, share it with everybody, because that really helps us as well, gets the messages out, and it shares the messages of unbiased, good information. Make sure to check out Raj at FreeCB Performance. Great videos, great Twitter, just fantastic output from him, and we will see you again next week.